Good morning, students. Yesterday we saw how different segments and different constituencies of Indian population saw the civil disobedience movement. They all had a different perspective to it. All saw it in a different manner, and all expected different things out of it. Okay, and yesterday we had, or rather till yesterday, we have covered how the industrial class or the business class came to see about it, how during the First World War they've had enormous freedom in terms of their manner of doing business, the opportunity to make money, and again, once the British had started concentrating on India and the Indian affairs, again their interests had taken a knocking, a backseat for the Britishers, and that they had their own different reason to support civil disobedience movement. And when Gandhiji cancelled it unilaterally just to create a good atmosphere for the talks at the second roundtable conference in London, no one was happy. No segment of India was happy about it. Now, today we continue. This is a very important topic. Students, always remember that this is an extremely important topic about the civil disobedience and how different sections of population, Indian population, saw the civil disobedience movement, and how it is that even if you have a single focus, a single objective to achieve, even then, if different people from different backgrounds come on the same platform, their way of looking at the whole focus or the whole objective or whole target, everyone is looking at it from their own perspective, which can be very, very different. Okay, so today we start with this paragraph. The industrial working class did not participate in the civil disobedience movement in large numbers, except in Nagpur region. As the industrialists came closer to Congress, workers stayed aloof. But in spite of that, some workers did participate in the civil disobedience movement, selectively adopting some of the ideas of Gandhian program like boycott of foreign goods as part of their own movement against low wages and poor working conditions. Uh, there were strikes by railway workers in 1930 and dock workers in 1932. In 1930, thousands of workers in Chota Nagpur tin mines wore Gandhi caps and participated in protest rallies and boycott campaigns. So, students, you can see that, like, the agricultural segment had stayed away from the civil disobedience movement. They did not participate very enthusiastically. They started, of course, with a great deal of enthusiasm, but then later they got disillusioned because the land revenue stayed as it was. No demand was met by the British administration about a reduction and the lowering of land revenue. So when Mr. Gandhi tried to revive it, again it failed because the agriculture labor was not in favor of it, and the peasant population saw that the Congress leadership was too closely aligned with the landed class, the zamindars and the rajas of those eras. Then the same situation was with the industrial class, where they felt that their industrialist owners, the rich businessmen, they were too closely aligned with the Congress party, and so the industrial class was more concerned about their worker rights, better working conditions for themselves, better salaries, housing. And that is the reason why they participated in the civil disobedience movement, because and there was certain segment of the labor population or the business population which felt that the Indian business was being unfavorably pitted against the British, who had all the facilities, who had all the tax concessions and all the privileges which the Indian businessmen did not enjoy. So they had their own reason of participation in civil disobedience movement. So that's what we are talking about since yesterday. That different segments of population went into this movement with different objectives. Their objectives were different, but for the nation as a whole, yes, if everyone was coming on the same platform, that is something which we wanted. If at least we were sure about one thing, that yes, and that thing was the most important thing, that yes, we have to get rid of the Britishers, whatever might be their reason of getting involved in this agitation. But ultimately, all of them wanted one single thing, and that was to send the British back to where they had come from. So, another important feature of the civil disobedience movement was the large scale participation of women. During Gandhiji's Salt March, thousands of women came out of their, now this is the of their homes, to listen to him, because the through, because Gandhiji had passed through all the different villages and all the different fields. So naturally, wherever it was a long march, and wherever he had stopped and halted, hundreds and thousands of women used to come to listen to him out of their homes and huts. Of course, was something which had rattled the British, and that is exactly the reason why the British, the number of people who participated in the Salt March and throughout the way was had gone up so much. It had become so high that it became impossible for the British to arrest the people who were with Mahatma Gandhi during the Salt March. So many went to jail in urban areas. These women were high caste families. In rural areas, they came from rich peasant households. And in students, in many parts of the country, actually, it was now not just about the women from poor families who were participating in these movements, not just the civil disobedience movement for that matter, but different small movement, but different large movements, large gatherings, small gatherings, where they were talking about, and where they were raising awareness in the minds of Indians as to how good it would be, and why it is important and imperative that British now should be sent packing, and women from higher caste, and women who were well off, all of them now started participating in different agitations and movements across the country wholeheartedly. So it was now not only about men who were on the streets, who were taking the might of the British Empire, but it was also the women who were participating wholeheartedly. And in many homes where the men had been arrested, the sons had been arrested, the women of those homes started participating in the national movement, and they started contributing in whichever way they could against the might of the British Empire. So, moved by Gandhiji's call, they began to see service to the nation as a sacred duty of women, and yet this increased public role did not necessarily mean any radical change in the way the position of women was visualized. Gandhiji was convinced that it was the duty of women to look after home and hearth, be good mothers and good wives. So essentially, this paragraph is trying to tell you that yes, women did participate in great numbers during the Indian freedom struggle, especially in the early part of 20th century, that is in 1920s and 1930s and 1940s. But then Gandhiji did not do much about their emancipation or empowerment, as this paragraph wants to suggest. But students, you have to understand, you cannot put, this was not some kind of a vegetable thali that the Indian freedom struggle was about, or the Congress leadership was trying to come up with, where you would have different kinds of vegetables and different kinds of chapatis and different kinds of and this was not a chappan bhog thing, right? You have to understand that the sole objective was to get rid of the British, you know, and a lot of things which had been there could also be taken care of once the British were gone. Then you can make your own laws, right? And that's what we ultimately did with our constitution. The moment we were independent, so many things were made part of the constitution, so many laws that were passed, so many acts were passed which empowered the women, which had empowered those sections of the society which had been oppressed for hundreds of years. So those things, the real political power, once Indians had it, they definitely did a lot for the betterment of their brothers, the Indian brothers, that is. Okay, but it would be kind of too far fetched to kind of assume that if women had started participating in the freedom struggle against the British, then what the Congress leadership should have done at that point in time was to start working towards their empowerment and emancipation. No, then the whole focus gets diluted. So students, you are in now class 10, so you'll have to learn to use your own brains. Okay, the limits of civil disobedience. Not all social groups were uh, moved by the abstract concept of Swaraj. One such group was Nation's Untouchables, who from around the 1930s had begun to call themselves Dalit or oppressed, because this section of the society was not very kind of taken in with great enthusiasm about seeing the back of British and kicking British out of India, because they had felt, and probably rightly so, that under the Indians, nothing would change, because they had seen in their daily lives that if the Indians would be there, they would be more oppressive, because Indian caste system they felt was extremely unfavorable to them, whereby the Brahmins and the upper caste people would be really unfavorable to them. At least the British do not really bother about their caste, because students, you have to understand that the British laws were not based on caste. They made the laws that they had made in a lot of criminal matters. The British were not about the prejudice against the oppressed class and the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. They didn't bother at all. Now, this was something which was quite liked by the people from the oppressed class, because they were not being biased against, or they were not being prejudiced against just for because they came from a caste which was not considered to be a higher caste. And that is why when Gandhiji gave a call for the British to go back, a lot of the people from the oppressed and the backward community, they felt that British were better masters. Actually, they felt that they would be the ones who would always remain oppressed, and British would be far better masters than the Indians themselves. Okay, we shall continue. Thanks.